Welcome to this masterclass session, Barry Gifford. You are best known for your collaborations with David Lynch, notably Lost Highway.
You know, as far as this strange perception of what he does, I mean, one thing that we both believe in, I wanted to say this from the beginning because I think it answers a lot of questions, which is that one thing we share is our view of what the cinema is, which is that when you enter the movie theater, so I'm not talking about watching movies on cell phones or computers or that kind of thing, which is not where they belong, if they're really movies, if there's a director who knows how to use the cinema. It's that you enter the theater and you enter a dream. And your function as the viewer is to surrender to the dream. And, you know, if it's a bad dream, you can get up and walk out of the theater. It's not like when you're asleep. But that's basically it. And then you're surrounded and hopefully overwhelmed by the sounds and the sights and, you know, everything. And that's how you immerse yourself entirely in it. So there's really no need for explanations. Yes, sure, I write in longhand. I mean, the thing is, I started doing that. I always thought that was a better thing, an easier thing to do. You put a little notebook and a pen or a pencil in your pocket and you can travel and go anywhere. And if you have an idea, a thought, you write it down. Jack Kerouac once described it as sketching, you know, likening it to an artist doing that. And so you can jot this down. But yeah, I write in longhand, then I put it on a manual typewriter. I make corrections on, you know, at both stages, so that's already 4 drafts. Then I make a final copy, changes happen. This is for a novel, for example. And then nowadays, I have to give it to my assistant to put it on disk because I don't use a computer. And for screenplays, it's a little different because I found after finally learning how to write a screenplay, it took quite a while because it's such a different language than writing fiction, I found it was better to dictate. I will write things down, but I found it's better to dictate. Usually when you have a collaboration, when there are 2 people writing a screenplay, Billy Wilder used to describe it as there's one guy who sits at the typewriter and the other guy who walks, or man or woman, walks around the room. In the case of Lynch and I, we're both sort of the guys who walk around the room. So every once in a while we'd like crash into each other. So we needed an assistant most of the time, not in the very beginning, but most of the time to sit there and you know, put it on the computer or you know, to record it in that way. And then we'd both take our copies, look at it, make corrections, and then come back the next day. And that's kind of how it was done. I don't know what's coming next, and I don't want to know what's coming next. You know, Mickey Spillane, who wrote, you know, dozens of thrillers and mysteries and that kind of thing, the Mike Hammer stories, which were so popular in America, at least in the 50s, he said he always wrote the ending first. And I'm sure there are many literary writers who write that way too. They want to know where they're headed. Once you have the ending, you know where you're going. That kind of thing. I'm just the opposite. I never know what's going to happen. I never know what anybody's going to say from one moment to the next. I might have some idea, and I'll maybe make a note and say, you know, well, you know, Joni decides to go off by herself and, you know, shoot heroin or something, you know, whatever it happens to be. But I may never get back to that. The moment may have passed. It may not be applicable anymore. So I like to be surprised. What did happen was when I began writing Sailor and Lula, Wild at Heart, the novel, I was in a little motel on the Cape Fear River on the North Carolina-South Carolina border, and I was supposedly still engaged in doing a journalistic job about fishing, billfish tournaments, and I grew up fishing, deep sea fishing and like that. So I was writing about it for the Atlantic Monthly, and I woke up one day and it was this strange room. It was all the walls were painted blue. In New Orleans we call it haint blue, like haunt blue, like a ghost kind of blue. In New York they call it Puerto Rican blue. In any case, the walls were all like blue like this, and I heard these voices. I really did. There was this conversation going on in my head. Someone once wrote that I heard it from another room. That's not true. It was all here. And it was Sailor and Lula, those characters, talking to one another. And they were lying in bed and having this conversation. And so I just got up and sat down at the desk and started recording in that way, writing the conversation. And then I knew I wasn't going to be writing anything else for a very long time. And it's true. And then, 600, 700 pages later, it's over, Finally, all the Sailor and Lula novels, all 7 are published in one volume. And so I finally feel like I'm done with them, but you never know. David asked me to write the screenplay. I was busy writing the second Sailor and Lula novel, Perdita Durango, at the time, which also was made into a film, and later. And I didn't have the time. I said, I can do it, but next year. He said, no, we have a window of time. We're going to make the movie right now. So I said, well, you go ahead and do it and send me the script. So in 6 days, he wrote the screenplay. And that's true. And he sent it to me, and I made my comments, and 80% of the dialogue was from the novel. So that's how it went. And then there were the leitmotif of The Wizard of Oz was added later for various reasons, and that's really how it happened.
I have not told you the type dog which I have. Perhaps you might even picture Toto from The Wizard of Oz. But I can tell you my dog is always with me.
When David first showed me the film, and I was with 4 or 5 other people in the Palais at Cannes, because the film was going to be shown the next night, and we showed it at 2 o'clock in the morning to check, the opticals were done and all this. And so I hadn't seen the movie. I just arrived from Paris, and David came up to me, and it's a 2,400-seat theater, so imagine if you're half a dozen people seeing this. You really hear everything. And he came up to me and he said, Barry, after you've seen this movie, I want you to describe it to me with one word. And then he left to go back to the hotel. So the next day, when I saw David, he said, well? And I said, how about 2 words? He said, okay. I said, not boring. And the thing about it is, Michelle's absolutely right. I mean, David cranked up all of this, but he wanted to show the fact that Sailor had killed a guy in the beginning. Almost all of the violence in the novel or the novels comes, if you will, off screen. I mean, it's talked about, it's en passant. And so David wanted to show that. And, I guess it turns him on, to see this stuff. So he did crank up that volume, that particular volume, and there were a lot of objections because there is a certain amount of violence and all that, but he wanted to establish the contrast between the tender love story, the real serious, honest love story between the two, and the violence in the world. And that was my theme too, in the sense that here are these relatively pure products. They're driving through the country, wherever they're going, whatever they do, and all this shit is raining down all around them. And how do they stay together? How do they keep this love intact? How are they able to connect and maintain their devotion to one another while all this stuff is happening all around them?
You were saying before that you are not somebody who keeps analyzing what he's doing. Lynch certainly doesn't want to do that, but still, I mean, you have to find some kind of language in which to discuss how you want to proceed, what you think is working, what isn't working, and even in this kind of story, how did you make things...
Well, you just want to be consistent with your characters and be true to them. Like when people had asked me, well, how do you write? Well, they're talking about fiction. I said, well, you write how you talk. And what I mean by that is how the characters talk. You want to be faithful to them. That's really about it as far as that goes.